Good evening and welcome to this month's Schuman Talk, where we discuss issues we face in Europe today in the light of Robert Schuman's vision for a community of peoples deeply rooted in Christian values. We do this each month on the 9th day at 6 p.m. in reference to the fact that on May the 9th, 1950, the French Foreign Minister Robert Schuman gave a 3-minute speech in which he laid the foundation for the European House, where today 500 million Europeans live together in peace. This was the start of the European movement for peace and unity. I call it the defining moment of post-war Europe. It has led to today's European Union. And as a result, we've enjoyed 70 years of unprecedented peace between EU member states ever since. Of course, 1 month ago and a year, that peace was shattered with the invasion of Russia in Ukraine. And tonight, our guest with us, Daria Kaleniuk, is the co-founder and executive director of the Anti-Corruption Action Center in Kyiv. And she's fighting a battle. It's not just on the Eastern Front there by Donetsk, but it is also internal, and not only internally in Ukraine, but all across Europe, as she's going to explain. So I want to say welcome, Daria, to the Schuman Talk tonight. Very grateful that you can take the time to be with us. You are a journalist yourself. Yeah, you are a journalist yourself, and you've been very much involved in media. And for example, this next photo, would you explain what was happening here? I think we know who the gentleman is, and that is you. We can see from the back. What situation is this?
It's exactly a year ago. It is Warsaw. Prime Minister Boris Johnson came to Warsaw, and I had a chance to ask him a question. And basically, that was a few days after Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. I left Ukraine to set up International Center for Ukrainian Victory and mobilize world for Ukrainian victory, headquartered in Warsaw. And but still, my team members, my colleagues, they were in bomb shelters. Some of them were trying to evacuate, and Boris Johnson came to explain why UK and why NATO is not able to impose no-fly zone over Ukraine. You know, there were civilian objects attacked by Russia every day. Children lived in metro stations during the day and during the night, and a column of Russian tanks was approaching Kyiv. And that was, for me, the way to ask Boris Johnson, okay, what is the alternative to no-fly zone? And if you say that alternative are tough sanctions against Russian oligarchs and against Russia, so why Britain didn't impose sanctions against Roman Abramovich at that time? And
he was one of the oligarchs, yeah, Russian oligarchs you're talking about, yeah. Yes.
Well,
and what's the response?
That was a kind of, it was emotional address, and my goal was to bring Boris Johnson, and through this press conference, I had a chance to send the message to all decision makers, I think, in the West, to bring them actually to the reality that it's not just a security issue or regular task you do at work as a politician. The matter, whether you're deciding something or not, it's actually your influence in the lives of millions of people, including children. So that was my emotional message to Boris Johnson. His response was, I think he felt he didn't expect the question. I'm confident he didn't expect the question. I was the only one Ukrainian. I was not supposed to be at that press conference, and he didn't know what to respond. He was actually honest, and he told that, yeah, I can't suggest no-fly zone to you, but we are trying to do something. And well, I asked him why you are in Warsaw. You're not even in Lviv. It means that you are afraid, and it means that NATO is afraid. But these were Ukrainians who were the shield, and getting on their using themselves as using our bodies of human beings to be the shield of this rain of Russian missiles. So that was that moment.
Yes.
Afterward,
Yeah.
Boris Johnson started to behave quite proactive towards Ukraine. He was one of the first politicians who came to Kyiv, and since then he and Britain, and still Britain is in top leaders on mobilizing world for Ukrainian victory. And I'm thankful for that. I'm also glad that Roman Abramovich was sanctioned in UK.
So we're talking about the former owner of the Chelsea Football Club, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. On the eve of the invasion, Putin's infamous speech, just he claimed that Ukraine was the most corrupt nation in the world. Now, I think we know that that was the pot calling the kettle black. And before I ask you, well, how corrupt is and has been Ukraine, can you define what corruption really is?
Well, first you mentioned this speech. I listened to this speech from in real time in my apartment in Kyiv on the eve of the invasion, and Putin mentioned every single anti-corruption and rule of law reform we were working in Ukraine with our team of Anti-Corruption Action Center for the last 10 years. He mentioned High Anti-Corruption Court, he mentioned High Council of Justice, he mentioned Special Anti-Corruption Prosecutor Office, he mentioned National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine, he mentioned even the crucial role of foreign experts in selecting judges for the into selecting members of the High Qualification Commission of Judges. So it indicates that for Putin, all our activity in setting up this institution was a threat. But they were set up for particular goal to ensure that corruption is not a rule in Ukraine, that corruption is an exemption. It's impossible to achieve this goal without having independent institutions and without having transparency tools where you finally you expose who owns what, where we oblige public officials to disclose their assets. So these were all reforms which we were working on, and we were kind of one of the key drivers in Ukrainian civil society. Putin mentioned that these reforms, he mentioned it like reforms, or that all this was the sign that Ukraine is losing sovereignty, and there are some NGOs which are totally controlled by the West, Soros and America, which are implementing them. So basically, he in between the lines, he mentioned our NGO, and for that reason, we were quite seriously considering the risk that most likely we are in the kill list of Russians, and if Russians invade, you remember just a couple of weeks before large-scale invasion, there were a couple of media reports suggesting that Russians have the kill list of people they want to assassinate after they take over Ukraine in 3 days. So we've got alerts by a few friends in the US, but also in Ukrainian government, that it's kind of 99% we are in the kill list. So coming back to your question, what is corruption? The focus of Anti-Corruption Action Center is grand political corruption. And this is a particularly different notion that from the petty corruption or administrative corruption. Grand political corruption is when you are able to abuse state institutions for your personal gain, where you are able to influence who becomes a member of parliament or who becomes a president. Grand political corruption is when you have resources in media, in government, to influence what kind of decisions government or parliament takes. And these decisions allow you to have your business, connected business to you, to have specific preferences. And very often this grand political corruption is quite complex. It's not necessarily very obvious. It looks like very legal, but there are ways and means how to expose that, how to prevent it. Grand political corruption also is not possible without engaging in different jurisdictions across the world, because it's using shell companies, the chain of complex structure of companies, nominal directors, lawyers abroad. That all is being done in order to disguise the illicit origin of funds, or to show that to try to hide that actually there is something illegal going on. So this is the kind of corruption our organization is focusing on. And it is very close to the notion of strategic corruption. And the notion of strategic corruption is when a country, usually it's authoritarian country like Russia or China, is using corruption to influence geopolitical goals. And Russia, for quite a while, was using corruption and weak institutions in Ukraine to control Ukraine from inside, to place their, to form even their political parties, to make popular some pro-Russian politicians, to influence narratives in the country, to get some decisions through corrupt judges, for to ensure that some pro-Russian oligarchs keep maintaining critical assets in Ukraine. So that is the form of strategic corruption. And this is when corruption becomes the issue of the national security. And we've seen that very vividly in Ukraine. But we were able for the last 10 years to build institutions, and these are state institutions, but these are also civil society institutions, which were able to prevent Russia destroying Ukraine from inside. And when these institutions, they were produced after Ukrainian people decided to live in dignity, and after Ukrainian people first time paid with their blood, first time after 1991, they paid with their blood at the Maidan for their decision, for our decision to be.
You're talking about 2015, 2014, 2015?
Yes.
Yeah, the Revolution of Dignity.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, just for the sake of our listeners, there is the Transparency Index, or the Corruption Perception Index, and this is compiled from numerous sources to see what is the perceived corruption in each country. And the green colors are the least corrupt. The red is the most corrupt. And you can see Russia there is a red color. Ukraine is actually in an orange color, indicating that it is less corrupt than Russia, but still a high degree of corruption. Poland comes out yellow there. And so can you describe the corruption about the time that we've just been talking about, 2014, 2015, when the Revolution of Dignity, the Maidan demonstrations took place as the Ukrainian people resisted the corruption in the leadership?
At this
Ukraine, 10 years ago, say, or more.
Oh, 10 years ago, we were almost there was almost captured state. So there was that time pro-Russian President Yanukovych and his family and close associates who were monopolizing the power and monopolizing the natural resources and resources of state companies.
And he was the one who owned this big mansion, the presidential mansion. Correct?
Yeah,
I think we have a slide of that. Yeah.
yeah.
Tell us
Well,
about
presidential mansion Mazhirya, it was like the symbol of corruption. But the specifics of Ukraine is that since 2011, 2010, 2011, 2012, information about corruption of Yanukovych regime was public. We had quite a good school of investigative journalists in Ukraine who were exposing corruption and who were reporting all these complex schemes and how this presidential mansion was built, how it's been connected to some other close associates of Yanukovych, like Sergei Andrei Kluyev, through shell companies. What was the role of even British companies and lawyers there? So basically, it was known information. It was public, and I think it was one of the advances of Ukrainian society at that time, because we were still able, and journalists were still able to expose corruption. This ability was limited, so not all access. We had access not to all crucial important data, but it was still possible. It was quite different to what was happening in Belarus or in Russia or in other authoritarian regimes. Like at the map you've seen on the corruption perception index, China is less corrupt than Ukraine. That's really funny for me. But corruption perception index measures perception of corruption. It measures, it means that if society knows about cases of corruption, the country will score in this index not good.
Yeah.
And honestly, in Ukraine, we had two pillars of anti-corruption reforms after the Revolution of Dignity. Pillar number one is setting up independent institutions with guarantees for their independency to be able to investigate, prosecute, and punish for corruption. But another pillar was creating tools for civil society and investigative journalists to expose corruption, publicly expose corruption. And this is where a lot of state registers became public. This is where we finally we did develop the electronic system of asset declarations of public officials, where public officials in Ukraine had to declare publicly what is the beneficial ownership in which companies they have, what are their high expenses, what is the hard cash they own. And we've seen the collection of yachts, not yachts, but yachts there were also, but we've seen collection of wines declared by public officials.
Let's go back to that mansion and tell us about that a little bit more in detail so we get the idea of how this corruption worked.
Well, this is the huge few hectares area near Kyiv on the bank of Dnipro River. It's a beautiful park, but it was taken through corruption schemes by the company affiliated with Yanukovych. And that company, which was actually controlled by foreign shell companies, was receiving money for payments needed to build luxurious palaces in this territory. And you see here one building, but there were about 10 buildings, at least 10 buildings, including laboratory which tested food for Yanukovych, including a special training center for luxurious dogs, included private zoo with ostriches. So
Many
that
cars and own. I think I've heard you talk about their own petrol station and chandeliers worth what?
and chandeliers, I don't know, worth millions of dollars. And in that mansion, which is on the picture, there was a huge piano, which is super expensive, and there are only two such kind of pianos in the world. So it was basically all this posh luxury.
Similar
And
to Putin's own palace, right?
sorry?
Similar to Putin's own palace.
Oh, I think.
Well,
I
no,
think
not. I mean, in type, but nowhere near the same
in
extravagance.
type, but I think that in 2014, when Ukrainian citizens freely got access to this, like I just mentioned, because until Revolution of Dignity won and Yanukovych ran away, we had publications about these mentions, but no one was inside. But now it's actually the Museum of Corruption. Anybody can come inside.
Uh-huh.
And I think Putin got very nervous about all his mentions, because his mentions are definitely much bigger. It's definitely not one mention, and definitely chandeliers and pianos and collection of other luxury stuff there is much bigger, better than the one of Yanukovych. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that gives us an idea of some of the corruption that was there, let's say 10 years ago. Have you been able to make a dent in that?
Can you say it again?
Yeah. Have you? Has your work been able to raise the standard in Ukraine? I mean, I think at that stage, Ukraine was the second most corrupt country in Europe, according to the Corruption Perception Index, and but now it's risen. Well, compared to Russia, in terms of the world situation, Russia's number 136, Ukraine is now 122, which is still comparative, but it seems to be making some progress. Are you encouraged by the progress, or do you feel discouraged?
We have definitely made significant progress, but I'm not measuring this progress with Corruption Perception Index, honestly, because my activity for the last 10 years contributed in a negative way to the Corruption Perception Index, because we have created tools to expose corruption. And no one is talking about corruption in Belarus. There are no tools to expose corruption in China. No more tools to expose corruption in Russia. If you are doing that in Russia, you are either killed, or you left the country, or you are Navalny and you are in jail.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't use Corruption Perception Index to measure how successful were anti-corruption reforms in Ukraine. However, for the last 10 years, there happened significant change. Because of all these reforms, because of the powerful preventive tools like asset disclosure system, because of the final work of the anti-corruption institutions with power to investigate, prosecute, and try senior level corruption cases, corruption is not more a rule. Obviously, there is corruption in Ukraine, obviously. And Every country has its level and form of corruption. But in Ukraine, the significant change has happened. So we formed the anti-corruption movement, and many people through digital services felt the change. So, and this is when we are coming, there is grand political corruption on the top of making decisions by public officials, administrative corruption. This is on the middle level where, let's say, a company pays a bribe or some other form of gratitude to a decision maker on the middle level to, let's say, receive a license for construction or whatever. And petty corruption, where basically you are caught driving fast, and in order to avoid a ticket, you pay a bribe. In all of these levels, there has happened significant progress, and citizens feel this progress. And honestly, after large-scale invasion, I live from time to time in Poland, and I'm actually, I live in between Kyiv and Warsaw. But I see the difference in administrative services and citizen services. So Ukraine became a very digitalized country. I have received my passport for traveling abroad just in half an hour. I came for the service center. Then I went without no queues. There's digital queue there, so basically I could have the time for the appointment, maintained digitally. I came there, they made a picture, and they told, okay, 10 days, and you will see in your DIA electronically, you will see whether you have a passport, and in 10 days I've got the passport. The first foreign passport I was receiving, probably it was, I don't know, 20 years or was a student, probably 17 years ago, and then the second 10 years ago. So the administrative process was a hassle. So we had to go in person in early morning, take a queue, and then you didn't know what kind of papers you need to bring. So it was horrible. It was really many people who needed that to get fast just got some services who would go on behalf of these people and pay a bribe to receive a passport. Now it's different. And this is in many cases like that. To register a business in Ukraine, it's very easy. You don't need to pay a bribe for that. Yeah. So on the level of senior level corruption, it is still there. But it's very unfair to say that Ukraine is the most corrupt country, one of the most corrupt countries in the world, or second corrupt country in Europe. I don't believe that. And I would want to ask even, countries in Western Europe, which are members of the EU, guys, where is your asset disclosure system of your public officials? If I am, let's say, in Belgium, which is receiving a lot of assets of Russians, and I want to check in downtown Belgium near the European Commission, who actually owns this luxurious house or this house with luxurious restaurant where representatives of the European Commission come and have very important talks. So who is the actual owner of this building? I can't track that. In Ukraine, I go to the registry, I put the number, I put the address of the building, I can see who is the owner, either a legal entity or natural board or a physical person. If it is a legal entity, I go to another registry. I see what is who are the owners of this legal entity, what are the beneficial owners, what is the history of this legal entity, and there are other tools which I can use in order to assess actually who is behind this estate. In Europe, in EU member states, in some of the EU member states, it's like Austria. I feel that it's like a heaven for it's tax heaven. It's heaven for hiding information, for money laundering. The same as Cyprus, Malta. So, and these countries are in the top of the corruption perception index.
Well, I know
But
here in Amsterdam as well, not too far from where I am right now, there's this in the Amsterdam, the Zuidas, there's lots of mail order, post box offices there that are being, all you need to have is a plant and an address, a plant in a room, and you can then set up your own money laundering kind of situation. So you have explained elsewhere how much the West is involved in so much of the money laundering situation through complex shell companies. When you've been using the term shell companies, you don't mean Shell Petroleum, although perhaps that is being used, but you're talking about companies within companies, shell companies, and how complex that situation can be. And can we have a glimpse of what that looks like in a diagram? Can you explain this a little bit?
It's an old diagram which we made in December 2013. We were running in the middle of Revolution of Dignity. We were running campaign aimed at seizing assets of Viktor Yanukovych and his officials. And this is
he was the president. He's the face at the right hand side on the bottom, the brown there, right?
Yeah. So and here we basically explained these are three estates, three assets. It's Mezhigirya mansion, presidential mansion. It's a luxurious forest where President Yanukovych was hunting. It's a helicopter pad and a special helicopter for transporting Yanukovych. He was commuting to work at helicopter. But we disclosed actually how these estates were owned. And basically, these were Ukrainian companies. You see there are this first line of companies. But when we unpacked the Ukrainian companies, we've seen companies in Great Britain, in BVI. And then when we had unpacked them, we have looked who is the director of this company, who is the manager of these companies. We went to the actually very interesting personality, Reinhard Proksch. He was the proxy director of a few more companies in Austria, in Great Britain, which were also related to other friends of Viktor Yanukovych. And you see here Andriy and Sergei Klyuev brothers. They were members of the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine. Alexei Azarov was a son of the Prime Minister of Ukraine. All these officials, they were using similar enablers. Actually, a few companies and one Austrian lawyer with Liechtensteiny connections. And this map, we simply showed how everything is interlinked. If you unpack this, if you unpack the structure of companies which own specific assets.
Thank you. Now, President Zelensky, of course, came into office on an anti-corruption platform, and his series Servant of the People had been seen on Netflix by millions of Western Europeans and people around the world. Where does he stand in this whole corruption do you process? Do you see him as really? I mean, he seems to be a real hero, and we all admire him for the way he chose to stay with his people and not run when he had the opportunity to do so. And what is his role in this whole anti-corruption campaign?
Well, President Zelensky, in the first half a year of his presidency, was super proactive in various anti-corruption measures and some of the critical reforms, including judicial reform, and also some of them of measures which we were pushing for years were unblocked, including the establishment of the High Anti-Corruption Court. But then there were some change in his in his government, and new people whom he invited, the new prime minister, the new chief of staff. They started somehow to slow down entire anti-corruption measures of President Zelensky. And but still, I think that Zelensky treats corruption as a risk. And I think he's becoming more and more a mature politician. We have to keep in mind that he has zero experience in politics before he became president. He is an excellent speaker and the face of Ukraine, especially during the war. He knows how to communicate with people. He's non-standard politician. He's not perfect manager. We have to admit that.
Yeah.
And some of the complex decisions which must be done, he outsources them to some other people within his team, and we have issues and questions to these people, how they perform. So, in overall, we are on the right track, but I think right now President Zelensky focus is war and diplomacy. I think he has limited personal capacity to focus also on painful reforms, which will build more independent state institutions and checks and balances. That is fine. And usually in such situations, you delegate. But the people to whom he delegated that, we don't have trust in those people, unfortunately.
Now, there were some high-level sackings recently. Was that, in your estimation, a good development?
Yes, it is definitely good development. There are two kinds of sackings of resignations of senior officials which happened recently. The deputy minister of infrastructure was caught on bribe by National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine, and he immediately was fired by the Minister of Infrastructure. It is indication that in Ukraine there is a system which can identify corrupt official and can act legally against this corrupt official with goal to hold him accountable through legal procedures. But there is also political responsibility, immediate political responsibility. The guy was immediately fired. The other case, the other sacking, happened in the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine after investigative journalists exposed facts of procurement of food for inflated prices for the army by the Ministry of Defense. And here, the reaction of the Minister of Defense was not satisfactory for us. He was denying that there is anything wrong happening there. He was kind of starting attacking the journalist, suggesting that it's kind of informational attack on him, which was clearly not informational attack. It was just the legitimate question: how do you guys buy food for the army during the war? Why you are buying eggs in kilograms? Why you are buying eggs for such high price and potatoes for such high price? While every single Ukrainian donates his or her own money for providing drones to army or some basic clothing, and that was a problem. So and until now, Minister of Defense is not admitting that problem. Yet a deputy minister who was in charge for these procurements and the head of the department, they were fired. So there is a result. But in this case, firing of the deputy minister and the head of the department is not enough. We have to understand what kind of change will be there, who will be new people appointed, how they understand the risks of corruption, how they are changing policies. And we need Minister of Defense admit that there is actually a risk and a problem. So these resignations and sackings, they show that the control of society is still there despite the war, that you can freely expose corruption in Ukraine despite war, even in the most sensitive topics, and there is immediate result in the form of resignations, at least.
Mm-hmm.
It is also important preventive factor. So, our Minister of Defense started to be more cautious. There is a law which passed Parliament on making public information part of the information about the procurements, non-weapons procurement. So that is the results of this anti-corruption track.
Yeah. How much can you assess the desire to battle corruption and become free of it comes from within Ukraine, and how much is the role that of outside agencies such as the EU, the IMF, and others insisting on reforms for the Ukraine to get support from these bodies? How much is it internal? How much is it external?
I would want to say that the drive and the demand for fighting corruption comes from inside Ukraine. And now, during the wartime, the tolerance to corruption of average Ukrainians significantly decreased. It means that the demand of society, average Ukrainians, for government, for officials to deliver, to change rules of the game for more fair rules, is getting higher and higher. Because every single Ukrainian has somebody, a friend, a family member who is fighting.
Yes.
Many people have beloved ones who were killed. And many families have beloved ones who were seriously wounded.
Yeah.
This is the price we are paying to live in freedom and dignity. It is impossible to live in dignity where corruption is the rule of the game.
Yeah.
But pressure of international partners, focus on anti-corruption and rule of law reforms of international partners like IMF, EU, is crucially important factor. It's not driving factor. It is crucially important factor. It's a leverage which we are using in order to push for very complex and unpopular reforms.
Yeah. One last question, Daria. Earlier you mentioned the Center for Ukrainian Victory. Can you tell us about that?
It is the international advocacy platform which we have established right after a large-scale invasion. By we, I mean Anti-Corruption Action Center ANTS NGO with Hanna Hopko as leader, Opora NGO, which is doing monitoring of elections with Olga Ewazowska as leader. And our Polish colleagues, Kazimierz Pulaski Foundation and leader of the foundation, Katarzyna Pisarska. So basically, we formed this vehicle to mobilize the world for Ukrainian victory. This is our mission. And we are doing a lot of advocacy trips all across the world. We are doing rallies with partners, with mobilized communities all across the world. We are doing a lot of media outreaches, communications, explaining what is actually Ukraine needs to win the war and what victory means. And basically, that's it. Ukraine can't win this war without help of international partners.
It's not a voice of government, it's a voice of civil society, is it?
We are the voice of civil society. We
Yes.
talk to the government, but we are absolutely independent from the government.
Right.
Sometimes government is not happy how proactive we are or what we do or how we do. But this is, well, we are doing this as citizens of Ukraine. Basically, all of us, we had some experience in international advocacy, in international communication. We understand more or less how decisions are being made among partner states. And we are communicating on behalf of the people of Ukraine without not being governments. And we can say some things which government cannot say. And I'm in touch with people who are fighting in the front lines. I see what are their needs. I see their feelings. They are not allowed to talk. I can talk.
Yeah.
And that's important work for us,
Yes.
because Ukraine can win this war, but it has to be done fast. We can't
Yes.
afford protracted war for decades or for years in Ukraine, because demographically, we just don't have enough people. And when Joe Biden and Jake Sullivan and Kamala Harris are saying we are with Ukraine as long as it takes, I really don't get it. I'm thankful to American people with the help of, first of all, American taxpayers, and then with the help of taxpayers of many other nations across the world, especially in NATO members, we were able to hold the line and liberate Kharkiv and Kherson. We were able to survive this winter, disregarding the rain of missiles attacking our critical infrastructure. I'm thankful to our partners and countries and people of nations which are helping us. But we are trying to explain that demographically, Russia simply has more people. Yes, they are fighting less motivated, but they are 100, how many? 60 millions. We are 45. I don't know how we are now after many women and children left, and after a lot of were wounded and killed. So we are holding the line, but our human resource is exhausted. So, and therefore, when our Western partners are saying we are ready to help Ukraine as long as it takes, so are you helping Ukraine as long as it takes to kill all our men and women able to fight, or to get them wounded? But when I'm talking to our military, I see clearly that they know what they need in order to win. And by winning, it's a simple. We need to retake territories and liberate our people. That's easy. For the borders of 1991, Crimea is crucially important there because it's a logistical hub for supporting Russian entire southern front and for blocking our Black Sea ports.
Yeah.
The blockade of Russia by Russia of Black Sea ports caused increase of people across the world who are in hunger to 350 million, from 250 to 350 million. 100 more people across the world are in hunger because of Russia war in Ukraine.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the reason they are able to block Black Sea ports is Crimea, because they are controlling Crimea and their Black Sea fleet. So we need to retake Crimea. And
Yeah.
I'm hearing in between the lines and non-publicly that Crimea is a red line for many nations in the West, because somehow we will irritate Putin, or he will be too desperate, or Crimea was always Russia. So I can't understand that. I understand that military partners of our nation partners, including the US, but also in many European countries, they understand as well what Ukraine needs. And if you are military from the NATO member country, you understand that in order to win, you need air superiority. To have air superiority, you need to rely on modern fighter jets.
Yeah.
But we are already more than a year in the large-scale invasion, and the approval of modern fighter jets didn't happen. If a year ago in April, when we were in our first trip to Washington, we were told, oh, we can't give you fighter jets because it's too long to train your pilots and maintenance officers. We told, okay, let's start trainings now. A year after, trainings didn't start. And, we are asking hard questions, publicly and non-publicly, our allies. While we are thankful to the people of many countries for all their support, politicians of many countries are not sincere in their goal towards the end result of this war. And we are confident that our armed forces are able to win fast, are able to retake all occupied by Russia territories and liberate our people. The time matters.
Yes.
And it is cheaper for NATO
I think we have lost Daria. I want to thank Daria very much for speaking so candidly to us and explaining.
and
She
for
do we have contact again? Well, let's bring this to a close. We want to thank Daria very much for helping us understand the complexities of what it is to fight the corruption. And while many of us have been praying for the soldiers and for the politicians, we need to recognize that people like Daria and Hannah Hopko has been on these talks before, represent civil society, and they're doing an essential job as they persuade trying to persuade their colleagues in other countries about the need for help. So we are very grateful for Daria's sharing today. Oh, you're back with us. Can you hear us again, Daria? You're muted at the moment. You're muted, I think. Are you able to unmute?
Yes.
Okay, that's good.
Yes.
I was just saying, we're very, very grateful to you, Daria, for your passionate presentation of both the complexities of corruption and fighting corruption, as well as what is needed to really bring this conflict to an end. And you made us aware that not only do we need to be supporting and praying for the soldiers and the political leaders, but people like you and Hannah Hopko in the civil society area. as you persuade other nations and with the actually the crying and pressing need right now to come to your aid, and you've won yourselves a great place in the hearts of Westerners and great admiration. But we know that's Ukraine needs more than just admiration. You need real support. So thank you so much for giving us the time to share your
Thank
story
you.
tonight.
And
Okay.
I want to finish with with a simple message.
Yes.
We started with Boris Johnson, and I want to finish with talking about our conversation. I told a year ago to Boris Johnson in that question that the World War III has already started. And I'm convinced that it is still ongoing. Just the battlefield is in Ukraine. Just now, different tools are being used in modern wars, various hybrid operations, and strategic corruption is used for hybrid operations. Therefore, it is cheaper, easier, and feasible to win war in the battlefield in Ukraine. Otherwise, the battlefield will be broader, but it will happen for sure. Russia will not stop. Providing any time for Russia to regroup, to mobilize, to build more weapons, and senior sister of Russia, China, I guarantee you that the battlefield will be much more broader. Let's win World War III now in the battlefield in Ukraine. It is possible. It is doable. It is cheap for Western societies now. You don't need to send your boots on the ground. You just need Western equipment enough to win our territories and liberate our people.
Thank you, Daria. That's very sobering and very clear. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your conversation and for all your questions and for the attention to this issue.